The property was located at the end of a narrow road, surrounded by ancient trees. During autumn, the dry leaves covered the path like a silent carpet that rustled under every step. The house, enormous and isolated, seemed to watch whoever approached. Located in the interior of the state of Vermont, in the United States, that mansion was known in the region simply as the property surrounded by silence. It wasn't an official name. It was simply the way the residents of the small town of Harrow Creek referred to the place. No one visited the property. Nobody talked about their owners. And as night fell, almost no one passed along the road that led to the iron gates. For decades, rumors circulated through the city. Some said that the family who lived there was extremely reserved. Others claimed that something terrible had happened inside that house many years before, but there was one detail that bothered everyone. The property never seemed completely abandoned. The lights would sometimes come on, some windows were open, and occasionally someone would see a figure walking slowly through the mist-covered garden. Even so, no one came near. The first to challenge this silence was Daniel Harper. Daniel was an investigative journalist. In recent years, he had built a solid reputation writing reports on forgotten stories in small American towns. He wasn't looking for political scandals or recent crimes. His interest lay in places where something seemed wrong, but that no one could explain. That's how he heard about the property. The story came to him by chance, during an interview in an old cafe in downtown Harrow Creek. The woman he was talking to had mentioned the mansion almost unintentionally. "You shouldn't go there," she said suddenly, looking out the window. Daniel smiled. "Why?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Because nobody comes back from there with answers." That was enough to pique his interest. In the following days, Daniel began to investigate. Records from the City Hall showed that the property belonged to the family, Whitmore, since the beginning of the 20th century. A wealthy family, discreet, almost invisible. The documents indicated that the last official owner had been Edward Whitmore, who died more than 20 years ago. But there was something strange. After his death, no heir had formally claimed ownership. Even so, the house was never sold, not abandoned. The maintenance bills continued to be paid, the electricity was never turned off, and occasionally workers were hired for minor repairs. But none of them stayed for very long. Daniel began visiting the oldest residents of the city. Most people avoided the subject, some simply changed the subject, others reacted with visible discomfort. But one man decided to speak. His name was Thomas Reed, former police officer of the city. He had worked in the department for almost 40 years. When Daniel mentioned the Whitmore property, Thomas was silent for a few seconds. Then she sighed. "That house," he murmured. "What's wrong with her?" Thomas looked directly at Daniel. "We've already been called there 3 times. And what happened?" The former police officer rested his arms on the table. "Nothing and everything at the same time." Daniel frowned. "Like this?" Thomas continued. "There was always a strange calling, noises, lights, people swearing they saw someone inside the house. And you went in?" "Yes." "So?" The man remained silent for a few seconds. "We never found anyone." Daniel wrote down every word. "But were there any signs that someone was there?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Always. Doors open, lights on, fresh food in the kitchen, but no residents, no visitors. Nothing." Daniel felt the familiar surge of curiosity that accompanied him in all his investigations. Something about that story didn't make sense. He decided to visit the property. The following afternoon, he drove to the end of the old road. The iron gate was partially open. The chain that was supposed to keep it closed was loose and rusty. Daniel parked the car and walked slowly to the gate. On the other side, the land stretched for several acres. The mansion appeared in the background, enormous, dark, surrounded by twisted trees. Even in broad daylight, The place seemed strange, too quiet. No birds, no sound of wind in the leaves. Only the creaking of the gate when Daniel pushed it open. He walked along the old stone path. The closer he got to the house, the more uneasy he felt. It wasn't fear. It had the feeling of being watched. When he finally reached the main door, he noticed something unexpected. The lock was newly replaced. It didn't match the rest of the house, which looked old and neglected. Daniel touched the doorknob. The door opened, without resistance. The interior was dark, but there was a clear smell of something recent. Cafe, as if someone had prepared a cup of tea just a few minutes before. Daniel took a few steps into the house. The floor creaked beneath their feet. He turned on his cell phone flashlight and illuminated the hallway. Old portraits covered the walls, all showing members of the Whitmore family, serious faces, cold stares. Then Daniel noticed something that made his heart race. One of the portraits was different. It seemed recent. The frame was new. The photo showed a man he had never seen in the family records, and in the lower corner of the painting there was a small metal plate with a single word engraved on it: Guardian. At that moment, a sound echoed from upstairs. Steps, boards, heavy. Daniel raised the lantern. The hallway fell silent again, but now he was certain of one thing. The property was not empty. Someone was inside the house, and perhaps she was waiting for him. Daniel remained motionless for a few seconds in the center of the hallway. The silence that dominated the house was heavy, almost physical, as if the air were laden with something that could not be explained simply by the absence of people. The sound he had heard upstairs had disappeared. Even so, the feeling of presence remained. He pointed the flashlight at the old staircase that led to the second floor. The wooden steps were wide, worn by time, and the handrail had deep marks from use. Someone had passed by there many times, more times than that seemingly abandoned house should allow. Daniel took a deep breath and decided to continue exploring the ground floor first. The main hallway led to several rooms. To the left was a huge living room, with tall windows covered by heavy curtains that blocked almost all the daylight. The furniture was old, but it was clean. This immediately caught his attention. There was no accumulated dust, no signs of abandonment. On the central table was a set of porcelain cups. One of them still had a small dark stain on the bottom. Cafe, recent. Daniel touched the surface of the table, free, but clearly used. He started photographing everything with his cell phone. Mental notes formed in his head as he observed his surroundings. Someone lived there, but nobody in the city seemed to know who, or perhaps they knew and preferred not to say. As he walked across the room, Daniel noticed something curious on the opposite wall. A large picture displayed a photograph of the property from decades ago. The house looked practically the same, but the surrounding land was different. There were other buildings, small secondary houses, granaries, an artificial lake. Today, none of that exists anymore. The photograph had an old inscription: Whitmore Estate, 1928. Daniel took a picture of the painting. The Whitmore family had been extremely influential in the region during the early 20th century. Historical documents showed that they owned vast tracts of land, employed dozens of workers, and financed a significant portion of the local economy. But something had changed. In city records, after the 1960s, the name Whitmore practically disappeared. The fortune had diminished. The employees were dismissed. The land was sold, leaving only the mansion and the silence that surrounded it. Daniel walked to another room. It was a library. Enormous bookshelves covered all the walls, filled with old books. Many of them dealt with American history, politics, and genealogy. In the center of the room was a reading table with a single lamp lit. That made Daniel stop. The lamp was on. Someone had been there recently. He approached the table. There was an open book on top of her. It was a genealogical record of the Whitmore family. The pages were marked with small notes written in pencil. Daniel began to look at the names. Generations upon generations of the family were recorded there, but some lines had been crossed out, erased forcefully, as if someone wanted to erase certain people from history. Among the crossed-out names, one caught his attention: Samuel Whitmore, 1974. Next to the name, there was only one word written by hand: missing. Daniel frowned. He remembered seeing that name during his research at the City Hall. Samuel Whitmore was the only son of Edward Whitmore, and according to official records, he disappeared at the age of 17, never found. The police at the time investigated the case for months, but no concrete leads emerged. Eventually, the case was closed. Officially, Samuel was just another young person who went missing in the United States. But looking at that book, Daniel began to suspect that the story was much more complicated. He turned a few more pages. The most recent records ended abruptly. After Edward Whitmore's death, there were no further updates. The lineage seemed to end there, but that didn't make sense. If someone was still living in that house, then someone had inherited that property. Daniel closed the book slowly. At that moment, he heard the sound coming from upstairs again. This time it wasn't just footsteps, it was something being dragged. Heavy, this is it. Like an antique piece of furniture being moved on wood. The sound echoed for a few seconds, and then stopped. Daniel looked at the stairs. His journalistic instinct told him that this was the most important part of the investigation, but there was also another, more primal feeling trying to warn him. Something was wrong in that house. Very wrong. Even so, he began to climb the steps. Each step produced a creaking sound that echoed through the silent interior of the mansion. When he reached the second floor, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere was different. The air was colder, and the hallway was partially lit by a single lamp hanging from the ceiling. At the end of the corridor, there was a door that was ajar. The light was coming from inside that room. Daniel walked slowly over there. When he pushed the door open, he found a surprisingly tidy room. A simple bed, a table, some books, clothes neatly folded on a chair. Someone actually lived there, but what caught his attention was what was hanging on the wall above the table, a large map of the property, marked with red circles, and all those circles pointed to the same place, the oldest part of the land, an area that no longer appeared in modern records. In the center of the map, there was a handwritten note. The handwriting looked recent. The silence must continue. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine, because at that moment he realized something even more disturbing. The chair in front of the table was slightly moved away, as if someone had stood up just seconds ago. And then he heard that sound again, but this time it wasn't coming from upstairs. It came from the hallway. Behind him, steps, boards, approaching. The footsteps in the hallway were slow, heavy, deliberate. Daniel remained still inside the room, holding his cell phone with the flashlight on, trying to control his breathing. The light flickered slightly in his hand. The footsteps stopped. Silence again. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Daniel approached the door cautiously. His instincts told him to leave immediately, but his curiosity, the same curiosity that had led him to that house, prevailed. He tilted his head out of the room. The hallway was empty. The old lamp swayed gently from the ceiling, casting irregular shadows on the walls. There was nobody there. Even so, Daniel was absolutely certain that someone had been there. He walked down the hallway, illuminating the closed doors on either side. Some were locked, others were just ajar. The first room was empty. The second one looked like an old office, full of yellowed papers and stacked boxes of documents. Daniel entered. The room had a strong smell of old paper and damp wood. He began to open some of the boxes on the table. Inside them were the Whitmore family's financial records, old spreadsheets, land sales contracts, property maintenance receipts. But one detail caught his attention. Even after Edward Whitmore's official death, the bills continued to be paid regularly. For 20 years, energy, water, land maintenance, someone kept that house running, and he did this with extreme care so as not to appear in public records. Daniel took photos of the documents. While he was doing this, he heard a distant noise again inside the house. This time, it seemed to be coming from the ground floor, a metallic noise, like a heavy door being closed. Daniel went back into the hallway. Something had changed. The air seemed even colder. He decided to go downstairs. Each step of the staircase seemed higher than before. The creaking of the wood echoed through the house like a warning. When he reached the ground floor, he immediately realized what had caused the noise. The main door was locked. It used to be open. Daniel walked over to her and tried to turn the doorknob. Locked. His stomach tightened. He didn't remember hearing anyone enter the house. Even so, someone had locked the door. Inside. Daniel took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. The house was enormous. Perhaps there was another way out. He began walking down the ground floor corridors. The kitchen was at the back of the house. When he entered, he immediately noticed something disturbing. The coffee maker was still hot. Someone had indeed made coffee there just a few minutes earlier. Next to the sink, there was a plate with leftover food. Recent. Daniel looked around. Everything was clean and organized, as if someone were living there normally, but no one showed up. Suddenly, a noise coming from the basement caught his attention. A deep sound, like wood being dragged on the ground. Daniel looked at the basement door. It was an old, dark, wooden door embedded in the kitchen floor. It was slightly open. A rusty chain hung to the side, as if it had been used to block that passage for many years. But now she was free. Daniel approached slowly. The sound echoed again from below. Drag. To stop. Drag again. Something big was being moved in the basement. He illuminated the staircase with the flashlight. Narrow steps led down into the darkness. The air coming from below was damp and cold. Daniel hesitated. Part of him knew he should leave the house, but the door was locked. And, more importantly, he needed to know what was going on there. He started to go down. The smell in the basement was different from the rest of the house. Older. Heavier. The lantern revealed rough stone walls and a vast space. Much larger than he had imagined. Old boxes were piled up everywhere, but what really caught his attention was in the center of the basement. A large wooden structure. It looked like a door, but he didn't take it outside the house. He was taking it downstairs. A kind of enormous trapdoor, reinforced with iron beams, and at that moment Daniel realized something that made his whole body freeze. The structure was open, and inside it, there was another staircase, going even deeper, to some place that didn't appear in any of the property records. There were marks on the ground next to the trapdoor, deep marks from something heavy being dragged repeatedly, as if large objects were being carried into that hole in the ground. Daniel moved the flashlight closer to the opening. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light, but then he heard a sound, breathing, slow, irregular, coming from the depths of the structure. Daniel stood motionless, because at that moment a faint voice echoed from the darkness, a human voice, low, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel's flashlight was shaking, and then the voice continued, clearer, closer. "Now, he knows you're here." The voice that came from the darkness disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Daniel stood motionless beside the opening in the floor, trying to discern any movement in the space below. The flashlight illuminated only a few steps of the underground staircase before being completely swallowed by the darkness. He waited. No response. No movement. Only a heavy silence seemed to dominate the entire property. Daniel took a step back. That voice didn't sound hostile. In fact, it sounded more like a warning. But there was something even more unsettling about those words. "Now he knows you're here." Who wash? Daniel decided not to go downstairs yet. First, he needed to better understand what was happening in that house. He left the basement and went back to the ground floor. The house remained silent, but now he had a clear feeling that he was not alone. There was someone there. Or perhaps more than one person. As he walked down the main hallway, he noticed a door he hadn't yet explored. It was located at the back of the house, partially hidden by an old cupboard. When he opened the door, he found a smaller room that appeared to have been used as an archive. Shelves covered all the walls. Boxes, folders, and notebooks were neatly organized, but something there was different from the rest of the house. The documents were recent, very recent. Daniel started opening some folders, and what he found inside them made his investigation take a completely new turn. They were newspaper clippings, hundreds of them, all related to disappearances. Men, women, teenagers. Cases have been spread across several states in the United States over the past 3 decades. Some had been investigated by the police, others had simply been forgotten. But they all had something in common: the dates. Daniel realized that the disappearances followed a pattern. They always happened at intervals of 2 or 3 years, and all the clippings were arranged in chronological order, as if someone were carefully monitoring each case. At the very end of the last shelf, there was a different folder. Black, no identification. When Daniel opened it, he found photographs. Photographs taken from a distance. People walking alone on empty streets, someone waiting at a bus stop, someone entering a parking lot. It was surveillance, targets. Daniel felt his stomach churn, but then he found something even more disturbing. Among the photos was a recent one. Very recent. It was a photograph of him, taken the previous morning. At the city cafe, Daniel remained completely still. Someone had been watching his movements ever since he arrived at Harrow Creek. This meant only one thing. His presence there was no surprise. He had been attracted for that property. Before he could fully process that idea, a noise from outside caught his attention. An engine. Daniel walked to the window and slightly parted the curtain. An old car was slowly parking in front of the property. The headlights illuminated the stone path. The car door opened. A man got off the bus, high, skinny, wearing a dark coat. Even from a distance, Daniel noticed something strange about the way he was moving. Too calm, too safe, like someone who knew that place perfectly. The man walked to the iron gate and carefully closed it. Then he locked it with a new chain. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The only way out of the property had been blocked. The man then began to walk slowly towards the house. But before reaching the main door, he stopped, and he looked directly at the window where Daniel was hiding. Even with the distance and the darkness of the approaching night, Daniel had a clear feeling that the man could see him, as if he knew exactly where he was. The man smiled slightly. Then he opened the door to the house with a key. Daniel heard the sound of the lock turning. Footsteps in the hallway, calm, methodical. The same voice that Daniel had heard in the basement echoed again. This time it's clearer, closer, but it didn't come from the underground darkness. It came from inside the house. "It took you a while to get here, Daniel." The journalist felt his heart race, because that voice was not weak, not scary at all. She was calm, almost polite. And then the same voice continued, now in the hallway. "But in a way, I always knew you were coming." The footsteps stopped outside the room where Daniel was. The doorknob turned slowly. The door began to open. And Daniel finally realized that his investigation had ceased to be just a story. He was now a part of it. The door opened slowly. Daniel stood motionless in the center of the file room, holding his cell phone with the flashlight still on. The light first illuminated the doorknob, then the door, and finally the figure on the other side. The man was older than Daniel had imagined, perhaps close to 60 years old, tall, thin, with grey hair combed back and a face marked by deep wrinkles. His eyes, however, were firm and attentive, like those of someone accustomed to observing everything around them. He entered the room calmly. No sign of hurry, no sign of surprise. She simply closed the door behind her and watched Daniel for a few seconds. "Good evening," said the man. The voice was the same one Daniel had heard moments before. Calm, controlled. Daniel tried to remain calm. "Who are you?" The man ignored the question for a moment. He walked to the table and looked at the photographs and newspaper clippings that Daniel had spread out. He sighed lightly. "I figured you'd find this." Daniel took a step back. "You were following me." The man looked at him again. "Not exactly. So how did you get that picture of me?" The man rested his hands on the table. "Because I needed to know who you were before allowing you to get this far." Those words made Daniel frown. "Allow it?" The man nodded. "You're a curious journalist, Daniel Harper. Forgotten stories, strange places. You've built an entire career investigating what others prefer to ignore." Daniel felt the discomfort increasing. "Who are you?" The man remained silent for a few seconds. Then he replied, "My name is Samuel Whitmore." Daniel's heart raced. He remembered that name perfectly. Samuel Whitmore, the young man who disappeared decades ago. The name that was crossed out in the family book. "That's impossible," Daniel murmured. Samuel tilted his head slightly. "Why?" "Because you disappeared when you were 17. Samuel gave a small smile. "Yes, and nobody ever found you. That's also true." Daniel looked again at the man in front of him. Now he was beginning to understand something. The shape of the face, the eyes. It was possible. If Samuel had survived, he would be approximately that age. Daniel swallowed hard. "So, you never disappeared?" Samuel walked slowly to the window. "I disappeared from the world." He drew back the curtain and surveyed the dark grounds of the property. "It was my father who decided that." Daniel remained silent. Samuel continued, "Edward Whitmore believed that some truths should not be discovered." "What truths?" Samuel turned around slowly. "The ones that are under this house." The journalist felt a shiver run down his spine. "What's in the basement?" Samuel watched him intently. "You heard the voice." Daniel hesitated. "Yes." Samuel nodded. "So you already know I'm not alone here." The tension in the room increased. "Who's down there?" Daniel asked. Samuel answered without hesitation. "People." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "People arrested." Samuel took a few seconds to respond. "Protected." Daniel stepped forward. "Protected from what?" Samuel took a deep breath. "From the world out there." Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You kidnap people and call that protection?" Samuel showed no irritation. "No." He walked over to the table and picked up one of the newspaper clippings. It was about the disappearance of a young woman in Chicago. Samuel put the clipping back. All those people were about to disappear anyway. Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Samuel answered calmly. "The world out there destroys people every day. Violence, drugs, despair." He pointed to the floor of the house. "Here, they are safe." Daniel was speechless. The idea was absurd, but Samuel seemed to deeply believe what he was saying. "You keep people locked up in a basement for years," Daniel said, "and you call that security?" Samuel finally showed a trace of sadness in his eyes. "I call it survival." Daniel took a deep breath. "How many people are down there?" Samuel did not respond immediately. He walked slowly to the door of the room. Then he said something that made the journalist feel the true weight of that situation, more than you can imagine. Samuel opened the door. "Come." Daniel didn't move. "Why?" Samuel replied, "Because now that you've come this far, you need to see the truth." He gestured toward the hallway. "The world believes this property holds a mystery." Samuel looked directly at Daniel, "But the real secret is alive, and he's waiting down there." Daniel stood still for a few seconds after Samuel opened the door. The proposal didn't sound like an invitation. It seemed like a decision that had already been made. The hallway was silent again, But now the silence had a different meaning. It wasn't just the isolation of the property, it was the feeling of being inside something much bigger than he had imagined when he arrived there. Samuel started walking down the hallway without looking back. "Come here," he said calmly. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but eventually continued. The two crossed the house in silence to the kitchen. The basement door was still open on the floor, revealing the staircase that descended into the darkness. Samuel stopped beside the opening. "Before we go downstairs," he said, "I need you to understand one thing." Daniel crossed his arms. "I understand enough already." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, you only understood what appears to be happening." He pointed to the basement, but not the reason. Daniel did not answer. Samuel continued, "When I was 17, my father took me down there for the first time. He looked at the kitchen floor, as if reliving that memory. I thought he was crazy too." Daniel felt his stomach clench. "Did your father do that too?" Samuel nodded. "Long before me." The revelation fell like a weight on the air. "So this story didn't start with you," Daniel said. "No." Samuel started down the stairs. Daniel followed him carefully. When they reached the first level of the basement, Samuel turned on some old lights hanging from the ceiling. The dim light revealed once again the large wooden trapdoor that led even deeper. But now Daniel realized something he hadn't noticed before. It had sounds, several, distant steps, doors opening, whispers, life. Samuel stopped beside the trapdoor. "Listen." Daniel remained silent. The sounds were unmistakable. People talking, constant movement. Samuel completely opened the wooden structure that covered the second staircase. "Come down with me." Daniel looked at the hole in the ground. The staircase was long and narrow. It seemed to go much deeper than any normal basement should allow. Even so, he started to go down, step by step. The air changed as they descended. Hotter, more humid, and the sounds became clearer. When Daniel finally reached the bottom of the stairs, he stood completely still. The space in front of him was enormous, much larger than any ordinary underground structure. It looked like some kind of community built beneath the property. There were corridors, doors, small makeshift rooms, a communal kitchen, tables, lights hanging from the ceiling, and most importantly, people. Dozens of them. Men and women of different ages walked through the underground space. Some were talking, others were sitting reading, some simply watched. When they noticed Samuel's presence, many of them raised their heads. None of them seemed scared. None of them seemed to be trying to escape. Daniel was completely confused. It didn't look like a place where people were held against their will. Samuel walked through the space. Some people greeted him discreetly. A middle-aged woman walked past them and said, "Good evening, Samuel." He responded with a simple nod. Daniel whispered, "They live here?" "Yes." "How long has it been?" Samuel answered without looking at him. "Some a few months ago, others many years ago." Daniel looked around again. A young woman was sitting at a table writing in a notebook. An elderly man was talking to two teenagers. Nothing seemed forced. Nothing seemed chaotic. It all seemed organized. But it was still deeply disturbing. "Can they leave?" Daniel asked. Samuel stopped walking. It took him a few seconds to reply. "No." Daniel felt the tension return immediately. "So they're under arrest." Samuel turned to him. "No." Daniel raised his voice. "You just said they can't leave." Some people nearby looked in their direction. Samuel remained calm, because leaving would mean returning to the same world that destroyed them. Daniel looked at those people again. "And you decided this for them?" Samuel replied firmly. "Many of them asked to stay." Daniel remained silent. The situation was far more complex than he had imagined. But before he could continue the discussion, a man ran down one of the underground corridors. He seemed frightened. When he reached Samuel, he spoke quickly. "Samuel, we need to talk." Samuel frowned. "What happened?" The man glanced quickly at Daniel. Then he turned to Samuel. The surveillance room. Samuel became tense. "What's wrong with her?" The man took a deep breath. "Someone else has found the property." Silence fell over the underground space. Samuel asked slowly, "Who?" The man said something that made Daniel realize things were about to get worse. "The police. They are coming here now." The news spread rapidly through the underground space. Within minutes, the previously calm atmosphere began to transform. Conversations erupted everywhere. People got up from their tables. Some walked through the corridors, trying to understand what was happening. Daniel watched everything attentively. What surprised him most was not the panic. That was the concern. Those people did not seem to fear Samuel. They seemed afraid. The world out there. Samuel remained silent for a few seconds after hearing the news. His gaze swept across the vast underground space as if he were calculating every possibility. "How long?" he asked. The man who had brought the news replied, "Perhaps 20 minutes, at most." Samuel nodded slowly. He turned to Daniel. "Now you understand." Daniel crossed his arms. "I understand that the police finally found this place." Samuel shook his head. "No." He pointed to the people around him. "Understand what will happen to them." Daniel did not respond immediately. Samuel continued. "Many came here fleeing something. Domestic violence, gangs, dangerous people, debt, stories that never appear in the newspapers." Daniel glanced at a woman holding a small child's hand near one of the tables. "Are you saying that they all chose this?" Samuel replied, "Some, yes." He paused. Others needed time to choose. Daniel realized something at that moment. Until then, he had only seen Samuel as the one responsible for all of that. But now he was beginning to understand that that underground structure was not just a prison. It was a strange community built on a radical idea. Samuel had created a place isolated from the world, perhaps to protect, perhaps to control, perhaps a little of both. But now that reality was about to disappear, Daniel spoke firmly. "You can't stop the police." Samuel replied calmly, "I know." "So what do you intend to do?" Samuel walked a few steps through the underground hall. People began to gather around him. It was clear that everyone was expecting a decision. Samuel stopped in the center of the space. "Listen," he said. Silence spread quickly. "The police are coming." Some people exchanged worried glances. Samuel continued, "I always knew this day would come." A woman asked, "What will happen to us?" Samuel took a few seconds before replying, "You will have to choose." Daniel watched everything attentively. Samuel pointed to the stairs that led back to the house. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave." Some murmurs arose. Samuel continued, "I'm not going to stop anyone." An older man asked, "And what about those who want to stay?" Samuel replied, "Then we'll have to disappear again." Daniel frowned. "Disappear?" Samuel looked at him. "This property is not the only place that exists." The revelation surprised Daniel. "Are there others?" Samuel did not answer directly, but the silence was enough. That network could be much bigger than he imagined. Suddenly, Daniel realized something important. If that were true, the story he had found could become something huge. A secret network, people living hidden from the world, perhaps voluntarily, maybe not. He looked at those people again. Some were scared, others seemed thoughtful, some were even relieved. Samuel then did something unexpected. He approached Daniel. "Now you also need to choose." Daniel frowned. "What to choose?" Samuel replied calmly. "What are you going to tell the world?" The journalist felt the weight of that question. If everything were revealed, that community would be destroyed. But if he hid the truth, he would be protecting a system that kept people isolated from society. Distant sirens began to echo outside. The police were arriving. Samuel looked at the stairs. Then he turned to Daniel. "Time's up." Daniel realized that for the first time since entering that property, he wasn't just investigating the history. He was now part of the decision that would define the fate of everyone there. The sirens got louder. Even underground, the sound was unmistakable. The police were approaching the property. The underground space, once relatively calm, was now filled with tension. Some people began to gather their few belongings. Others walked quickly through the corridors, speaking in hushed voices. But there was no panic yet. There was only one collective decision being made. Samuel stood still for a few seconds in the center of the hall, observing everyone around him. He seemed to be absorbing every detail of that moment. Perhaps he knew that that place, as it existed, was about to disappear. Daniel climbed a few steps of the stairs to get a better hear of what was happening outside. The sirens stopped, car doors slamming, police radios, firm voices giving orders. The property had been fenced off. He went back underground. "They are here," he said. Samuel nodded. "I expected that." A young man came running towards him. "Samuel, the north tunnel is ready." Daniel turned around immediately. "Tunnel?" Samuel pointed to one of the darkest corridors in the complex. "There is an old path that leads to the forest." Daniel felt the surprise grow. "You planned this?" Samuel replied calmly, "My father planned it." The revelation reinforced something that Daniel was beginning to understand more and more. That underground network hadn't been built haphazardly. It was something that had existed for decades, perhaps generations. Samuel raised his voice so that everyone could hear. "Anyone who wants to leave should leave now." Some people started walking towards the tunnel corridor. Others remained where they were. A young woman holding a child's hand asked, "Is the police going to arrest us?" Samuel answered honestly, "They'll probably try to understand what happened here." The woman seemed undecided. Daniel was watching everything. The situation was becoming increasingly complicated. If the police were to enter and find that underground space full of missing people, the scandal would be enormous, and Samuel would probably be arrested immediately. At that moment, Daniel realized something important. Samuel wasn't trying to run away. He was still there, observing people, helping them decide. Daniel approached him. "You're not going to use the tunnel?" Samuel replied calmly. "No." "Why?" Samuel looked towards the underground hall. "Because someone needs to explain this to the world." Daniel was surprised. "You're going to turn yourself in." Samuel did not answer directly, but his expression said it all. The sirens outside gave way to another sound. Steps. Many steps. The police were entering the house. Daniel heard voices echoing from the upper floor. "Police! Is anyone home?" Lanterns illuminated the corridors above them. Samuel looked at the people who were still in the hall. "The tunnel will remain open for another 5 minutes." Some people started walking quickly towards the secret exit. Others stayed, perhaps out of fear, perhaps because that place had become the only home they knew. Suddenly, the sound of a door being broken down echoed upstairs. The police had found the entrance to the basement. Samuel took a deep breath. He looked at Daniel one last time. "You were looking for a story." Daniel remained silent. Samuel continued, "Now you've found something much bigger." Heavy footsteps began to descend the stairs, leading to the first level of the basement. Police flashlights illuminated the stone walls. A police officer shouted, "There's a passage here!" The defining moment had arrived. Samuel walked slowly towards the stairs that led to the police officers, but before going up, he stopped and looked once more at the underground hall. For the people, to the secret world that had existed there for decades. Then he started to climb, and Daniel realized that the final confrontation was about to happen. The police officer's footsteps echoed closer and closer. The light from the flashlights streamed down the basement stairs like blades cutting through the darkness. The agent's firm voices filled the space of the house above. "Careful! Feed the light! There's an open passage!" Samuel continued climbing the stairs slowly, showing no hurry. Daniel followed him a few steps behind, observing every detail. When Samuel reached the first level of the basement, the light from several lanterns hit him at the same time. 3 police officers immediately pointed their weapons. "Hands up!" one of them shouted. Samuel calmly raised his hands. "Everything is fine," he said. The police officers exchanged quick glances. One of them took a few steps forward. "Who are you?" Samuel replied without hesitation. "Samuel Whitmore." For a second, none of the police officers reacted. The name seemed familiar yet distant. Then one of the older agent's eyes widened. "Whitmore?" He glanced quickly at another police officer. "The missing person?" Samuel nodded. "Yes." Tensions in the atmosphere increased. The first police officer still had his gun pointed. "Is there anyone else in the house?" Samuel replied. "Yes." The police officer tightened his grip on the radio strapped to his shoulder. "Central. We found an individual in the basement. Possible connection to the Whitmore case." Then he pointed to the staircase that led even deeper. "What's down there?" Samuel replied calmly. "People." The police officers immediately got ready. "People arrested?" Samuel took a second to answer. "People living." The response confused the agents. At that moment, Daniel climbed a few more steps and appeared in the light of the lanterns. One of the police officers turned around immediately. "Hey, you too!" Daniel raised his hands. "Calm down, I'm a journalist." "Go down slowly." Daniel obeyed. Now the police officers were looking alternately at the 2 men. Samuel continued completely calm. The older officer pointed to the underground staircase. "Move away from the passageway." Samuel took a step to the side. "They are not dangerous." "Who?" "The people down there." The police officer gestured to 2 colleagues. "You too, check it out." The 2 agents began to descend the staircase that led to the large underground hall. For a few seconds, silence filled the basement. Then the lanterns disappeared into the darkness below. Daniel realized that Samuel was watching every move with extreme attention, perhaps worried about the reaction of the police officers, perhaps worried about the people who were still down there. Suddenly, voices echoed from underground. First, they're confusing, then clearly surprises. "My God, there are a lot of people here. Call for reinforcements." The police officer who remained in the basement immediately looked at Samuel. "What did you do here?" Samuel replied firmly. "I gave them a place to exist." The police officer seemed torn between disbelief and outrage. "Did you kidnap these people?" Samuel shook his head. "No." "So why are they living underground?" Samuel responded with something that made the atmosphere even more tense. "Because the world out there failed them." At that moment, more voices emerged from underground. Some people were going up. Daniel turned to look. A woman appeared on the stairs first, then a man, then 2 more. The police officers were completely surprised. Some of those people had been officially registered as missing for years. A young woman who appeared to be in her early 20s looked at the police officers and said, "We weren't kidnapped." The police officer frowned. "What do you mean?" The young woman replied, "We chose to stay. Other people started to confirm it. He helped us. I had nowhere to go. It was safe here." The police officers were visibly confused. None of this matched the type of crime they expected to find. Samuel looked at Daniel. For a moment, the 2 understood exactly what was happening. That wasn't just a police investigation. It was something that no one was prepared to explain. The older agent took a deep breath and spoke into the radio. "Central, we need immediate reinforcements." He looked at Samuel again. "This is going to become the biggest case this city has ever seen." Samuel showed no surprise. He simply replied, "I always knew this day would come." But then something unexpected happened. A woman who was still underground suddenly screamed. "Let's wait." Everyone looked at the staircase. She quickly climbed a few steps, and he said something that made Daniel realize that the story still had one last revelation. "Samuel." They found the old room. Samuel frowned. "Which room?" the woman replied in a tense voice. "The one your father ordered to be closed." Silence filled the basement. because at that moment Samuel realized something that even he didn't know. There was more secrets on that property, secrets that even he hadn't discovered. The silence that filled the basement was unlike anything that had happened up to that point. Samuel remained motionless for a few seconds after hearing the woman's words, a sala antigua. That expression seemed to carry a weight that no one there fully understood. The older police officer looked from Samuel to the woman. "Which room is this?" Before Samuel could answer, another voice emerged from underground. "Here!" He was one of the police officers who had gotten off the bus earlier. His voice echoed from an even deeper corridor. "There's another passage down here." Flashlights began to move rapidly. The police officers descended a few more steps and entered the large underground hall, now filled with people watching tensely. Samuel finally started to descend again. Daniel followed right behind. They all followed the corridor indicated by the police officer. It was a part of the complex that Daniel had not yet seen. The hallway was narrower, older. The stone walls were covered in marks from ancient tools, as if they had been excavated decades before. At the end of the corridor, there was an iron door, heavy, rusty, clearly much older than the rest of the underground structure. One of the police officers shone a light on the door. There was a metal plate attached to it. The letters were almost erased by time, but they could still be read. "Whitmore Archive, 1932. Samuel frowned. "My father always said that part had been sealed." The police officer looked at him. "Sealed, why?" Samuel did not answer. He approached the door. The lock was broken, probably opened recently. The police officer pushed slowly. The door creaked loudly as it opened. The smell coming from inside was heavy, old, like a space that had remained closed for decades. The lanterns illuminated the interior of the room. Old shelves covered all the walls. Wooden boxes, files, pastas, documents, hundreds of them. Daniel approached slowly. It was a gigantic archive. Records organized with extreme care, but these were not records from the underground community. They were much older, much more disturbing. Daniel opened one of the boxes. Inside were black and white photographs, old, showing unknown people. Some of them looked like workers, others prisoners. One of the police officers picked up one of the documents. His face changed immediately. "This can't be." Daniel approached. The document was an old report, dated 1933, signed by Charles Whitmore, Samuel's grandfather. The report described something that no one in that room could have imagined. Experiments, social experiments conducted with people brought to the property. People isolated from the outside world, studied, observed, tested. Daniel turned the page. More reports, more names, hundreds of them, some marked as failure, others such as acceptable result. And the silence in the hallway became absolute. Samuel seemed completely shaken. "I didn't know that." His voice was low. Daniel looked at him. For the first time since he had met him, Samuel seemed truly lost. "My father told me that our family created this place to protect people." Daniel picked up one of the old documents. Perhaps he was trying to correct something. The older police officer watched everything with a serious expression. "This changes everything." He looked at Samuel. "Your family didn't start this to help anyone." He pointed to the files. "They started as an experiment." Samuel seemed to be struggling to process it. Decades of secrets, decades of lies. The property, shrouded in silence, held something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Daniel slowly closed the box of documents. Now he understood why the Whitmore family had protected that place so carefully. Because the truth should never have been discovered. The police officer spoke on the radio again. "Central. We need federal investigators here." He looked around the room. "This is not just a criminal case." Daniel observed Samuel. The man who believed he was saving people now had to face a devastating reality. His own family had created that system for completely different reasons, but one question still remained. If all of that had started as an experiment, How had it transformed into the strange community that now existed there? Daniel knew it would take years to answer all those questions, but one thing was certain. The silence surrounding that property had finally been broken, and the whole world would soon hear this story. Months later, the former Whitmore estate was surrounded by police fences and investigation vehicles. Federal teams continued to analyze the underground tunnels and the thousands of documents found in the sealed archive. The story spread throughout the country. Some people called Samuel Whitmore a criminal. Others considered him someone who tried to right the dark wrongs of his own family. Many of those who lived underground were reintegrated into society. Some chose to start over. Others disappeared again, far from the cameras and public scrutiny. As for Daniel Harper, his reporting only revealed part of the truth, because, even after everything, one question remained unanswered. How many other places like that still existed, hidden in silence? Stories like this make us reflect on something profound. How many truths remain hidden behind walls, silence, and secrets that span generations? The Whitmore estate seemed like just another isolated mansion, but it held decades of mystery, complex human decisions, and a truth no one imagined they would find. Now we want to know your opinion. Do you believe Samuel was trying to protect those people, or did he simply continue a system that should never have existed? Leave a comment sharing what you would do in this situation. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share so that more people can discover mysteries like this one.